I guess to start, I mean, we chatted last winter after the deer season, talked about the numbers and how the deer season went. That's kind of where we left off. So then the deer management initiative was formed. But if you just want to quickly refresh why the deer management was formed and what that is.
Yeah, later in I guess it was 2023, the Natural Resources Commission had asked the department to work with various stakeholders to bring forward recommendations for this coming year. What it looks like in terms of deer management and try to work together with folks. So we took that process very seriously, and we created what was coined the Deer Management Initiative, and recognizing that there are very different management challenges in the lower peninsula compared to the upper peninsula, we felt it was really important to have two specific separate teams to focus on each one of those different land masses and the challenges associated with each one. We also put together a third group just with our tribal partners and focused some conversations with them, specifically how they would like to be engaged more with different management activities. A lot of it focused more on like what we would call the non-regulatory side of things. But that being said, we had really great discussions and conversations in all the groups over really a 3 or 4 month period. The actual process and the group makeup was various stakeholder leaders that we've typically and historically worked with, but we've also worked with non-affiliated or independent individuals as well, knowing that a lot of the groups that we work with don't represent all of our hunter numbers, and we've really focused also on bringing voices to the table that were contradictory to the department. We just didn't want a lot of individuals that said, we like what the DNR is doing, we support that, and we actually searched for a few individuals that were quite critical of our management actions over the past couple of years and invited them to the table, because we felt like it was really important to have all the different perspectives for deer management represented. We had experts on forestry, we had experts on agriculture. Obviously, we had a lot of different hunters and hunters that had different values that were identified in their applications. Some were very much focused on meat eaters, some were more trophy hunters. We really tried to get a diversity of opinions because we felt that that would lead to a better overall product.
Mhm.
We spent probably about 2 months meeting very intensively, brought in speakers, both within our agency, outside of our agency, covering all sorts of different topics. Hunter recruitment and retention, just basic deer biology, predators, winter habitat, climate shifts, changes, you name it, agriculture, damage, stuff like that. So we really got a lot of information in front of folks, and I think that was very much appreciated. I give them a lot of credit. There was a lot of evenings spent in front of a computer listening to presentations, data being presented. So the level of participation was pretty impressive, and I give all the members of these teams a ton of credit. They were very committed, took this responsibility very highly, and were extremely dedicated and passionate towards this whole approach. And then in early May, we met, each group individually developed a set of recommendations based on some scenario development exercises that we had put together. And that's ultimately what came out of each individual group was these recommendations for both regulatory changes and non-regulatory changes. And we as the department were tasked with trying to interpret some of that information. Again, I think everyone was kind of a victim of some of the short timelines that we had to work with. And admittedly, we got some of it wrong, but did our best to correct it, throughout the process as we presented it to the Natural Resources Commission. And then just, of course, last week, the Natural Resources Commission made their final decisions for the 2024 deer hunting season. And that was really the end of this first phase of things. And then we're trying to consider and think about what the next phase looks like and trying to pick up some of those pieces that were left behind.
Okay. Um, I've heard, some differing views on the DMI and the outcomes of the UP DMI. Do you feel that they left that with a unified voice, or was it kind of split and not really in agreement?
I think uh, I think a split opinion is a fair assessment, especially for the UP group. Let's face it, nobody's going to agree on the best path forward. I think the most that we can probably agree on is what a and healthy end product looks like, but how we get there is very different. And in some topics, I think there was a lot of support within the DMI, the UP DMI group on certain things, and that's great. And then certainly on other topics, it was far more divisive. So the final result and what went into the report, sort of reflected some different scenarios and different topics that were clearly divisive, and there was individuals that were very much against what that final report included.
Mm-hmm. So I guess jump in. Probably the most divisive is the taking of antlerless deer. And
Right
that
on.
got spent about an hour trying to figure out that proposal, that amendment, in the NRC meeting. But I guess if you just kind of want to talk about the thoughts, I guess, with the group, because there's those that were for antlerless taking throughout the UP, and then those that were opposed throughout the UP, and then ultimately what ended up being brought forward to the NRC.
Yeah. So right now, currently, when we talk about UP deer management, specifically antlerless harvest in the Upper Peninsula, things are broken down into three different tiers, and we try to align that with high snowfall, mid snowfall, and low snowfall zones as best as we can. There's certainly always room for discussion where those boundaries might fall. In our high snowfall zone, we've historically been extremely restrictive with antlerless harvest, especially over the last 10 years. You really can't legally shoot an antlerless deer in those units. In our mid snowfall zones, we have a very limited quota that's been applied to present some type of opportunity, but it's still fairly restrictive. And then in our low snowfall zones, it's fairly wide open. Anybody that wants to go shoot an antlerless deer pretty much can.
Mm-hmm.
Those topics were discussed quite a bit. Generally speaking, in the low snowfall zone, pretty much everyone is in agreement. Those more liberalized opportunities should be continued. The real concern, the real rub occurred in certainly the high snowfall zone and even the mid snowfall zone. There's a group of individuals that are very much against any type of opportunity provided in the high snowfall zone and felt that those restrictions should be expanded to the mid snowfall zone, for lack of a better term. You've got another group that was willing to concede certainly some antlerless harvest opportunities in the mid snowfall zone, but at least wanted the opportunity to take antlerless deer, particularly with archery equipment, in the high snowfall zone. So what came out of the final recommendation was this scenario that really tried to strike a compromise between those two extreme views. And what that looked like was in the high snowfall zone, hunters would now have the opportunity to at least take an antlerless deer on their deer combination license through the early part of archery season. The idea there being it would provide some opportunities to folks that wanted to put a deer in their freezer, but it wouldn't be too impactful that people would really be likely giving up their buck opportunities to use on an antlerless deer unless they felt it was absolutely necessary. Furthermore, it would protect, the potential for migrating deer, later in the season. And with that, that mid snowfall zone, the quotas would be dramatically reduced from basically 1,000 recommendations in the east and the west, all the way down to 0. And that's the scenario that was developed out of the DMI teams. A concession on the mid snowfall zones, fairly substantial reduction, basically zeroing out antlerless quotas,
Mhm.
but allowing for very limited take of antlerless deer just in the first half of archery season.
Mhm.
And that's, if you were to go onto the website and look at the report, that's what you would see came out of that
Mhm.
group.
Okay. And that recommendation then was brought to the NRC. And what was the NRC's decision on that one?
Yeah, so that was included. We included those recommendations in our original order. And for anyone who's not familiar with, we develop what's called a conservation order that goes to the Natural Resources Commission. It serves as a recommendation for them to vote on.
Mhm.
And then the Natural Resources Commission, which is an independent 7-member panel that has been appointed by either our current governor or previous governors, can either reject parts of that order, they can approve it in full, or they can amend it and make changes. The Natural Resources Commission voted to change the recommendations from this DMI group. And what transpired was essentially a continuation of the prohibition to take antlerless deer in those northern zones. So really nothing has changed in that regard. Antlerless harvest opportunities, even with archery equipment, is completely restricted in those high snowfall zones. In the mid snowfall zones, they reduced the antlerless quotas in DMU 351, which is the eastern half of the Upper Peninsula, from 1,000 to 0. And in the western half, they reduced it from 1,000 to 500. And then in addition to that, they restricted antlerless harvest opportunities in that mid snowfall zone, that you cannot hunt or take an antlerless deer after December 10th.
Mm.
So you can still buck hunt with archery equipment after that date, but after that date, that December 10th date, you cannot shoot an antlerless deer.
So the antlerless harvest has become more restricted than it was previously. Is that
Correct. Yes. Yes. There were continuations of those restrictions that were brought forward, which is obviously very different than what the recommendation that came out of the DMI work group.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Hardcore Outfitters of Iron Mountain. Hardcore Outfitters strives to promote and instill an enjoyment of the outdoors for all ages and individuals. Whether you're already an avid outdoors person who enjoys the thrill of the hunt or newly learning the art of archery, sharpen your skills at their indoor archery range and check out their line of products from Matthews, Hoyt, Bear, Raven, Centerpoint, 10-Point, and Wicked Ridge. If being on the water drives your passion and has you hooked, they have an impressive selection of year-round fishing gear, plus a full-service bait shop and the largest selection for fly fishing the UP. Go to Hardcore Outfitters in Iron Mountain, tell them I sent you, and discover what outdoor hobby or adventure awaits you.
one group wants to take does, the other one doesn't want to take does. Does the DNR have any, recommendation of their own on which would of those to improve the deer herd or not improve the deer herd, or is that just not available?
I think from our perspective, when we look at what, the total number of deer and even antlerless deer being harvested, it's quite minimal.
Mhm.
So, from our standpoint, we certainly edged more toward the idea of, this is not impactful, and we would like to provide those opportunities for our hunters. I don't think the reason that the UP deer situation is what it is because one regulation path was followed and compared to another. Like, I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot more complexity. I think there's very much a habitat issue,
Mhm.
first and foremost. The different types and frequencies of the severe winters we're getting. Obviously, the predator situation is one of the first things out of most people's mouths on why we're in this situation.
Mhm.
There's a host of reasons. I think we've looked at this as an opportunity to provide a little bit more opportunity, even potentially erring on the side of, could this help things in the long run? Potentially, maybe. If the habitat is really that poor, we need to give it a chance to recover a little bit. And it's really difficult to grow a deer herd and recover habitat at the same time. It has to be sort of a one or the other type thing. And if we're really focused on habitat, then we need to reconsider how deer are being managed in order to have that habitat recover. So we thought that the recommendations made by the UP DMI team was a reasonable compromise
Mhm.
between those two very extreme positions that occur.
Okay. Yeah. I listened to your presentation on that you had given to the NRC prior to them voting on these recommendations and proposals. I mean, you talked a lot about carrying capacity and habitat. I guess what was your reasoning behind that presentation before that NRC meeting and really kind of hammering home that habitat and carrying capacity with them?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of that. Sorry, I got a dog here. So I think a lot of the reason that I felt it was important to talk about carrying capacity, because it seems to me that there's this message that more deer, more does will translate into a faster growing population. And there obviously is some truth to that, but it depends on where you're at in what we call our sustainable yield curve. And what I wanted to highlight is that if by chance the UP deer herd, for whatever reason, despite it being in low numbers, is at carrying capacity, then we are going to continue to be frustrated with lack of deer numbers because the habitat would not be able to support more. So if we're trying to grow a deer herd faster and faster and faster by having the maximum number of pregnant does on the landscape, while conceptually that sounds like the right idea to do, the effort then tends to shift more on what we call fecundity, which is basically how many deer can be born. It's the reproductive potential of your deer herd.
Mhm.
The emphasis should be on recruitment, which is basically how many deer can you get to their first birthday. So it's, if we are having 100,000 fawns, 200,000 fawns, whatever the number is, and our population doesn't change, that means that the number being added is to a population is equal to the number of animals being removed. And that results in zero net growth.
Mhm.
And that only occurs at two spots on our sustainable yield curve. It occurs when there are no animals in the population, and it occurs when there's a maximum number of animals at the population. And I just wanted to point out that sometimes more is not always better with these things. We have to sort of understand where our deer herd is at relative to the amount and quality of habitat that's available too. Otherwise, we're going to keep running into the same wall over and over and over again. And it's just going to give everybody a headache.
No, that makes complete sense. So, I mean, where I'm getting is like a lower deer density will help to improve the habitat then. Sure.
There's, yeah, I would look at this as a two-step process, right? It's the first thing is trying to develop and create better habitat, and then you can grow a deer herd.
Right.
If you start by just growing the deer herd and trying to make changes to grow a deer herd, and the habitat is not ready or can't support that, your efforts are going to be confounded and they're going to fail. So it's just an alternative viewpoint that I wanted to put out there because it's not necessarily as clean and simple as we just need more does, we just need more pregnant does, and then we will get more deer. So many of the places we've had already in the Upper Peninsula where we've been really restrictive with our deer harvest, especially our antlerless harvest over the past few years, are some of our lowest deer density areas, or some of the areas where we're at least getting the largest complaints of in terms of the lack of deer. So maybe we need to take a step back and look at this a little bit differently rather than doubling down on the same approaches that we've been trying for 10 years.
No, that all definitely makes sense. I learned a lot actually from that presentation of yours.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Glad somebody got something out of it.
Well, we'll move on, or we could hammer on that all day.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Big Valley Ford, Dodge Chrysler Jeep in Ewan, Michigan. When I'm traveling around the UP, I'm surprised, and not surprised, by how often the vehicle in front of me has a Big Valley sticker on it. Big Valley Ford Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram is located in the tiny town of Ewan on the west end of the Upper Peninsula. People from across the region buy their new and used cars and trucks from Big Valley, and they drive all the way back to Ewan to get them serviced. Which reminds me, I'm probably due for an oil change myself. I'm on my 4th new Ford vehicle with over 500,000 miles under their tires, so I'm probably due for a tire rotation too. Big Valley is a one-stop shop for all your vehicle needs with a full service department, parts department, and body shop. I got caught in a hailstorm once with my last truck, and they made it look just like new. If you're looking for a new or used vehicle, go see them in Ewan or check out their inventory online at bigvalley.biz.
Back to the deer regulations recommended by the UP Deer Management Initiative. Were any of those actually accepted by the NRC or even partly accepted by the NRC?
I guess you can highlight the reducing the DMU 351 from 1,000 to 0 as a partial acceptance of the topics that came out of the NRC. But again, that was really kind of contingent on the expansion of limited antlerless archery opportunities in those northern units, those high snowfall units. So I guess there was a partial recommendation that was approved, but by and large, and there were certainly some that were tabled for future discussion, but I believe the other items that were brought forward were removed.
Okay. So regulations that did, that are now that will come in effect in the UP for the 2024 deer season. What are those? We talked about a little bit, but to kind of run down what the new regulations will be.
Yeah, I mean, really, there's not a lot that changed. If you're in those high snowfall units, very little, if anything, has changed. I believe that's all the same. Season dates are essentially going to be the same. Yeah, there's nothing really different in those high snowfall units. In the mid snowfall units, you're looking at reduced quotas. And certainly if anybody's already put in for the lottery drawing for their access permit, they'll see that DMU 351 is not an option. So that's not available this year, where previously we've drawn up to 1,000 individuals for that hunt. There still is a lottery opportunity for an access permit in 352 in the West, although the number of successful hunters will be reduced this year. So again, last year and in the previous years, we've been drawing 1,000. This year, we're going to draw 500. but the actual units in the zones will still remain the same. And then if you're a late season archery hunter in any of those mid snowfall units, you can buck hunt through the entire year, October 1 through January 1. However, after December 10th, you can only buck hunt. You cannot pursue or harvest an antlerless deer in any of those units. And then in the very extreme south, I think really the only change that occurred is that a 3-point to a side antler point restriction was restored onto DMU 174, which is right along a small, thin DMU right along that Wisconsin border. I think it was previously removed based off of the department and the commission's response to finding chronic wasting disease just in southern Dickinson County several years ago. They just went through the process of restoring it this year. So that was just it had been in there for a long time, had been removed for a couple years, and it's just restored. So those are really the only regulatory changes or things that would be different this year for the 2024 season in the UP.
I mean, I guess I think people were expecting and anticipating a lot of big changes, but there definitely was not much. Yes.
Yeah, there were some other items that were certainly brought forward as part of the discussion. I mean, certainly as part of that UP DMI recommendation, adding a 3-point to a side restriction, so an antler point restriction across the entirety of the UP on the deer license. Of course, it already is existing on the combination license, or at least one tag of it. That was an original recommendation that was shot down. I'm trying to remember some of the other things, but there was
DMAs were shot down.
Yeah, so there was a recommendation for deer management assistance permits to be basically eliminated in those sort of top 2-tiered units, and that was eliminated as well. So now our staff still has the ability to issue deer management assistance permits for those who might have a lot of deer, even locally, in areas that might not have a lot of deer, but sort of at the unit level. Mm-hmm. So there at least is that management flexibility that's still offered to folks for that. Although in many areas, our staff have already been very conservative with issuance of those DMAP, deer management assistance permits anyway.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Cooking Wild Seasonings.
Cooking Wild Seasonings. Flavor and meat. Just mix, heat, and eat. That simple? You bet. Now even easier with our new grab-and-go 4-pack cartons. 4 combinations to choose from. Whitetail Hunter, Deer Camp, Summer Sausage, and Fresh Sausage. Make it fresh, make it yours. Make it easy. Grab a 4-pack today. Available at various locations, including all Chris Northwood's neighborhood store locations. Find out more about Cooking Wild Seasonings at cookingwildseasonings.com.
Going back to those antlerless quotas in the mid-snowfall zone, so I just applied for the first time. I live a mile away from M28, so I'm like right on the border on the west end here. So I have a piece of property on the south side of M28 that I also hunt. Is there a lot of do a lot of people apply for those tags to begin with, or?
We've sold out the past couple years, so we definitely get the quotas completely filled. What we've noticed is, even though, so if we had 1,000 available in the east, 1,000 available in the west, only about somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 would actually claim the access permit that allows you to use the antlerless license in that area. So right away, you're looking at about 40% of the maximum available quota already being eliminated because people aren't accepting their access permit that would allow them to hunt. When you look at the total harvest, you're looking at, probably somewhere between 300 and 400 deer being taken between both of those units, maybe a little bit higher, and certainly almost definitely higher if you count like non-reporting, that unknown factor.
Mhm.
But even still, with the total amount of licenses that were issued, you're probably looking at less than 25% of them ultimately filled across what amounts to probably about 6,000 square miles. So I'm sure we have the total number of individuals that have applied. That's a number I don't know off the top of my head, but we have been selling out. But out of those 500 that are issued on the West End, if history's any indication, I would bet that maybe anywhere between 100 to 150 of them get filled.
Okay. It's not too many. It's not really much of a
Not too
change
many.
there. Yeah.
No, it really won't make that much of it really won't make a difference at all, to be honest with you.
Okay. Um, Now the regulations that the NRC did approve and made changes for 2024, I mean, will those make any changes or any improvements to the deer herd or go towards that goal of the deer herd quality improvement?
I'll be honest, Kristen, I don't see a lot of um, changes that have been made that are really going to dramatically impact how the UP herd is managed, or the lower peninsula herd is managed. I think there's still a lot more work to be done. And some of that, I do think some of that can be, improvements from a regulatory standpoint. I think a lot of the work that needs to be done is what I would call non-regulatory. I mean, really emphasizing on trying to build up habitat and trying to decide how habitat can be improved. And if we are at carrying capacity, near carrying capacity in many areas for our deer herd, what does that look like in terms of which types of forests can be protected, whether it's to maintain that predominant winter cover, or is there different cutting opportunities that can be afforded that might improve the quality of their summer range as well? Because certainly we spend a lot of time talking about, the quality of the winter habitat that helps them get through winter, but I think we also need to focus on the summer habitat quality too. So make sure that they're in really good health going into the winter when they get into those yards.
Mhm. Yeah, 'cause from what I understand, the non-regulatory stuff was kind of tabled to future discussions. Has there been any discussion when that might take place or anything like that?
Yeah, I think we wanted to get through a lot of the regulatory stuff because that was the time sensitive stuff.
Mhm.
There's definitely a need to revisit some of those non-regulatory items, but you're right. It was sort of tabled off to the side a little bit because in many cases they're more longer term approaches and shifts that need to occur, where the regulations needed to be set at the July meeting to make sure that everything gets into our hunting books and made available at a reasonable timeline. So when hunting season starts, everything's finalized and it's printed and available for hunters. Over the next couple months, we'll start to revisit what some of those original recommendations look like, and see which ones make the most sense to start moving forward with and trying to act on. And in some cases, there might be some pretty substantial shifts that need to occur, and it might take months to, I would even say years, to try to dive into some of these things. If there's one thing that certainly I learned through this process is that there's not going to be a quick fix on either peninsula. This is a slow build in many instances to try to get things to where we need to go. It didn't get like this in a year, 5 years, 10 years, and it's not going to resolve itself that quickly either. So, I think as long as we continue to keep the lines of communication open and continue to work on these things collaboratively, I think we'll have a much better chance. But we definitely need to come to a lot more agreement on some of these things, and I think that would make for certainly a better opportunity for progress.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by BAM Tools. My friend Andrew wants to help support this podcast, but didn't know how he should advertise his business, So here goes. BAM Tools is a small, family-owned and operated business out of Ewan, Michigan, but they cover the entire UP, delivering tools to all sorts of businesses. Inside the tool truck are hand tools, power tools, automotive shop supplies, and so much more. I should tell Andrew I need a new Grizzly cooler, preferably blue. BAM Tools is also a tech tire supplies distributor, and Travis is the guy behind the wheel of that truck. So if you see Andrew or Travis in a BAM Tools truck, tell them thanks for supporting this podcast.
Another thing that was tabled was any like regulatory or non-regulatory on predator management. I'm just guessing that's just nothing was discussed there because you were focused on getting those rules out for this deer season.
Yeah, so it was a deer specific order. So we wanted to keep the focus on that. And to be fair, the group that was put together, their full attention was on deer management, realizing that predators were part of that, but we also probably lacked the expertise on the fur bear side, on the predator side, to fully move forward with recommendations, at least at this time. So there was a recommendation to restore the coyote season to a 12-month period out of the UP group. Mm-hmm. That recommendation will be passed off to our fur bearer biologist and go to the appropriate fur bearer working groups for further discussion on that. And then obviously, I think most people know the status on wolves. They still remain federally protected. We would very much welcome the opportunity to have state management restored, but that's currently not a reality. So one of the recommendations that came out of the UP group was to simply make sure that when state's authority, management authority is granted, that the department would be able to react or respond in a timely manner. And I would go too far out on a limb to talk about what that would look like. There's much smarter, much more qualified people in our division to talk about that. But, basically make sure that there's some level of preparedness if and when those federal restrictions are relieved a little bit.
Okay. What else do you want to talk about? I know it's going to cut me off in about, a little bit. If it does cut me off in 4 minutes, can I send you another Zoom link quick?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay. Yeah, I had the paid one and then I got rid of it because I didn't do a Zoom interview for a while. And so there was one other thing that affects the UP, but it's been moved to 2025 because it was too late to make any changes this year, and that was the youth and the Liberty hunt going to an antlerless only. Yeah. Was that the Independence hunt as well too, or is that just the September one?
No, it's both. Yeah, it was recommended, and that was an amendment that was put in by one of the commissioners, and the commission voted to support it. So yeah, as it stands right now, the Liberty hunt in 2025, so not this year, but the following year, would convert over from an either sex hunt to an antlerless only hunt. And the same would apply to our Independence hunt, which is the 4-day hunt that occurs in October, that only individuals with a qualifying disability can participate in. That one would also be an antlerless only hunt. And since that has come out, there's certainly been a lot of strong opinions on really both sides in terms of what that looks like. And that would be a statewide application. So it would affect the UP, but it would affect the Lower Peninsula as well. So I have a sneaking suspicion that we're not done talking about that topic, especially over the next year or so. But that's currently what the language would reflect, that both of those seasons would move forward with an antlerless only hunts in 2025. And then there would be a sunset on that in 2029. So if nothing else changed, then that would go away 4 years later.
And what was the reasoning behind that? I mean, I guess I can see in the Lower Peninsula, you have a problem with too many does, and I know you were pushing last year for people to harvest does because you just have an overabundance of them. But if we have this group up here that wants to protect does, then I guess it doesn't make sense in my head to then take does only in these seasons.
Yeah, it's tough for me to answer it because it didn't come from the department.
Right.
I believe that the conversation around changing that focused on trying to make sure that especially our youth hunters focus or appreciate the value of taking an antlerless deer, especially early in their hunting careers. Yeah, but your point is well taken. The department's always had the approach that the youth hunt, the liberty hunt, should always be an either sex pursuit, and that's because we always felt that the mentor should be able to direct and what the youth's harvest decisions look like. So if they certainly feel that a youth hunter should take a doe with their first year, or a small buck rather than a larger buck, then that decision can be handled at the family unit level rather than us as a government agency saying you have to do this or you have to do that. So we've often left it more open. We recognize that season, actually either of those seasons, don't really contribute to an overwhelmingly large segment of the total harvest. So give them the opportunity, let the mentors provide the guidance in terms of what makes the best approach for that individual hunter. So we've always really assumed that position regarding antlered harvest, antlerless harvest during that season or either of those seasons.
I like that approach. I've done some stories on the youth hunts, and I've seen both that and the first deer that walks in, because this is only 2 days and we want to have the kid harvest a deer successfully, and that's the one. So
yeah. So we'll provided the regulation stays, which I have no reason to think that it would or wouldn't at this point. But I'm sure additional discussions will be had because it's such a long-term implementation. If that change does occur, then we'll continue to monitor what those results look like. Are more antlerless deer getting harvested? Are more antlerless deer getting harvested in some of those northern units of the UP? Is hunter participation in that season dramatically changed because now you can't shoot a buck, or just people not going out? There's a lot of questions and responses to consider, and we'll continue to do our due diligence on it, provided that change stays in effect next year.
And you're saying when you sent out the hunter surveys this past year, it was pretty much split 50-50, those who support youth taking an antlerless only, whether or letting the youth shoot either an antlered or antlerless.
Yeah, there was slightly more support for our hunters as a whole to shift the liberty hunt to an antlerless only hunt.
Okay.
But when you looked at the breakdown of age, not surprisingly, if you were a youth hunter, you were more supportive of the opportunity to take an antlered deer.
Right.
And then that level of support continued to diminish as hunters got older. So it really sort of showed I can't hunt in this season, so I don't want them to be able to take that. And I'm sure much of this is certainly well-intentioned, but it also sort of reflects that the individuals that are most impacted by it probably are most likely to disagree with this change.
Today's Discover the UP podcast is brought to you by Copper Shore's Community Health Foundation. One of the biggest opportunities that we have in Michigan's Copper Country is the Copper Shores Community Health Foundation. They are 100% focused on improving the health of our community with hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants and scholarships each year, as well as incredible programming like Meals on Wheels and a victim support team that helps victims of any crimes, and a team focused on improving the mental health of our residents. These are really invaluable resources for our area. I've assisted Copper Shores with local photography and videos and have seen firsthand the impact that they make. If you want to see the amazing work they do and maybe even support it by becoming a donor, visit coppershores.org. So thank you to Copper Shores for your support of this podcast.
Going back to the youth, I just had another one. Well, how long has the youth season been in effect? Or how long has that been, that September, those dates? Do you know?
Man, I knew you were going to ask me that. I want to say it's probably, I don't know the exact year. I probably should.
Okay.
I think we've probably had it anywhere between 20 and 25 years.
Okay.
So it's been fairly well established at this point.
Mm-hmm. Now, so deer regulations, those are usually changed every 3 years, or they were revised every 3 years. Is that?
Ideally, we change them every 3 years. The reason we would like to do that is because once you set a regulation, you would like to have a couple of years of consistency,
Mm-hmm.
To sort of track what actually happened. Is what you hoped to accomplish by changing a deer regulation, did it actually occur?
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to do that is to keep things stable for several years, just so you can try to understand what that looks like. I've been up here in Michigan in this position for 10 years, and I've gone through deer regulation changes 11 times. So we don't really follow through very well with this 3-year cycle that we really would like to see happen. And sometimes that's for good reason. Sometimes there's an event that occurs that we feel that is important to respond to out of cycle, but in many instances, we are looking at and reviewing deer regulations every single year.
Which I thought would be an interesting story sometime. I should maybe do, is just kind of looking at the history of the deer regulation changes over the past, I don't know how many years, but just kind of go probably the more drastic ones, but just a history of the deer hunting regulations, what they were like in 1990, what they were in 95, even farther back, 70, 60.
I feel like you could probably put like a several volume encyclopedia collection together in what that would look like. Yeah, there have been so many changes and tweaks, and if you want to follow up with that, I think I have a file. I don't know how far back it goes that has some of those changes highlighted. So
okay.
I have to dig around for it a little bit, but I might be able to get you at least a head start on some of that if that's something you want to track down.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to look at. Just going back to the deer management initiative and all this work that they put in, all this time over the past few months, just have their recommendations pretty much rejected. I mean, was that really worth their time and effort? I know, some of them feel really defeated. I haven't talked to them all, obviously, but
yeah. I don't know. Yeah, you'd probably have to talk to a few more of them to get their opinions. I've been actually talking with some folks that I've been working with this DMI, the development part of it a little bit. I'd actually really like to go back to those individuals that participated and just do a quick little resurvey in terms of, I know how they felt after the final report was written and the recommendations came out. I'd like to follow up 2 months later or 3 months later and see if their perspectives have changed now that knowing what has transpired. So I think that would be a valuable evaluation to undertake. I have not been able to reach out to either group as a whole at this point. I've spoken with some individuals individually, but I've not been able to reach out, to the collective group. So I can see it going both ways. The sentiment that I've gotten so far from those who I've spoken with, there has been a little bit of disappointment and almost defeatism based on the work. I do think there has been some value in going through this process. There have been relationships forged. There have been partnerships developed. I think there are some things that these individuals are passionate about, and they've connected with other individuals who share that passion. And I can easily foresee, partnerships and working relationships happening that have come out of this because of the DMI. So I'm reluctant to say that, it wasn't worth it. I won't go that way, because I do think that there was some value. That being said, I recognize that they might be very disappointed with some of the outcomes, at least to date.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, as always.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, of course. Happy to do it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Good luck with everything. I hope everything comes out okay, but yeah. I don't know what to say.
Right. Well, the next NRC meeting up here, is that October again?
I think it's October. Yeah. So I would bet that there's some folks that show up and at least provide some comment on things that transpired, or some suggestions on, ways to improve things moving forward. So, yeah, I don't know what's on the agenda yet. It's still too far out, but yeah.
Well, if I have any other questions regarding deer before this deer season, I'll give you a call, or I'll see you then.
Yeah. You know how to get a hold of me, so don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Thank you, Chad.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
Kristen.
Yep.
Take care.